Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first cross-stage ThinkBIG section meeting here at GitLab. This is the CI/CD and Ops group. We'll dive right into the agenda. So one of the reasons we're here is we got the SUS score, or the System Usability Scale. We did some research, found out some overarching themes around what our users are feeling about GitLab in general. And there were two notes that I thought would be a good thing for us all to address. Is one, we have a bit of a walled garden experience. So each feature set or stage kind of has an isolated experience for our users. And the other is that getting started with CI/CD is an experience that we could improve upon. This came directly from the SUS score. I think a few of us have heard that just talking to our users. So I don't think anyone's really surprised by that. What I would like to do is, this meeting is full of the strategic focuses for the CI/CD and Ops group. So this is the product designers and product managers. And I'd like for us to come together and talk about the high-level strategy of ways that we could resolve some of the issues our users are experiencing outside of just a single stage. The expected outcome for this meeting is that after we're done and we have some brainstorming and some new ideas, we will work to create some new issues, whether they be problem validation issues where we need to go research with our users, or if it's actual solutions. And one note, just as we dive in so that everyone can be prepared, is I'd like it if we could add the ThinkBIG label to whatever issues are mentioned in here or related to ThinkBIG at all. It's one of the ways that we can measure the success of this meeting and whether it is valuable for everyone. For context, Package has been having a smaller scale ThinkBIG, and since we've started it, we have around 20 issues that have either come from ThinkBIG conversations or have been discussed during ThinkBIG. That's specific to the package offering, but it is still kind of a way to show the validity of this conversation. Does anybody have any questions or comments before we dive into kind of the first brainstorming ideation issue or idea?
Nope.
Perfect. Let's dive.
Are you gonna give it like a little bit of a preview how we're gonna approach that, probably, right? Or
yeah, I was just gonna shamelessly use my own first point as an example. So good call, Nadia. I was trying to be sneaky, but you caught me. So diving into the first idea, one of the areas that we could improve upon as a cross-stage unit is displaying some of the package data. And so that's the overall question. And the thing I'd like to brainstorm is, where can we present this data that's not the package UI? To help guide the conversation and kind of start some brainstorming, we got this insight from our users. And I think that's a really important thing to call out, is this is their experience and this is representing what they've talked about. For two things that are kind of related to this, we heard from all of our users pretty regularly that if they never have to go to the package UI, their life is incredible. It's a set it and forget it feature. So as long as it's working, as long as it's predictably doing what it's supposed to be doing, they never want to visit us ever, which is fantastic. Being an invisible feature is great. One of the things, the three main reasons they come to our UI, which is, again, we came from research, was the easy one is to check and see if the package I uploaded is in the registry like it's supposed to. This is a pretty encapsulated issue and not one that I think can really spread apart through the rest of CI/CD, but the other two research points are pretty important. The first one is that they are visiting the package UI, the registries, whether it be a container or a package, to check if CI built it properly and published it. And it's just a final check to make sure it was in there. So this could mean that there's places in the pipeline views that we can just show them, hey, we created this thing, and they never have to go to the UI. The next is a little bit more ambiguous. One of the reasons they're coming to visit the UI is to look up what version of a package they're supposed to be using, whether that be what is the new released container or image that's supposed to be used in production, what's the new dev environment. There's a lot of those different areas that they're looking for, that if we could offer that somewhere else throughout the rest of CI/CD, we could really enable our users. I'm going to pause for a second. Those are the two research insights. Looks like Dimitri already dove in and has an idea. So this is the fun part of ThinkBIG. We've kind of provided some information, some backstory, some user stuff, because we love that. And now is the part where we come up with conversation. So feel free to dive in if you have any ideas. and we'll go from there. So Dimitri.
Should I take it away? Yeah, I was basically adding a point, a reference to the next CI point. So there's a little bit of shameless promotion of the next one. But it's kind of goes into that, you know, like we build our CI pipelines and then we do a pretty poor job currently at updating the user of its outcomes or its status. I mean, you can find this information, but you have to dive into it. And I'd say you kind of struck a snare when you said like, hey, this information or this technology should become invisible. And there are certainly opportunities to improve there. If I have to say anything else, I would say I'm wondering about, for example, package versus a release. Is there a big difference in wanting to publish a package versus release? Is one more important than the other? But probably Ayana can give an answer to that, or Mike.
Before we dive into Hayana or Mike, I do want to make one more comment that's super important, and we learned our lesson with our package ThinkBIGs. It's really important that we take notes in the document so that it can be transformed into actionable insights, as well as include everyone that maybe can't make this time zone. So if we can all work together and be awesome at notes, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. So Hayana and Mike, feel free to jump in areas where that package or image related data might be useful.
There's a release evidence page that we have right now, right? Like for when a release is done, there's a page that has a bunch of evidence. Does that page have an API?
That's a good question. Because right now, yes, we do have something in the API, and right now what we do is that we collect the data automatically when a release is created. So it's that's what we are displaying as evidence collection on the releases page. But I've heard from users saying that they want to have the ability on the UI as well to add any other package data or software information from the interface as well, and have the ability to even name that and make available to different types of users in their systems. So really think about as well on permissions and things like that around package. So let me find the information about the API for you.
I was just wondering if there is an API, maybe we could just write add any arbitrary file to that page, including maybe like a Docker image, or a package is really just a collection of files as well.
Let me get it for you.
Ayana, have you heard anything about kind of the usage of images in the release as well as packages? Packages and images tend to have a unique usage. One of the things I've heard from our users is when we release a new version of our software, that means there's a new image that's supposed to be used for everything. Have you heard anything like that in terms of release or the way that they're thinking about it?
Not in images, no. I can look into the insights, and maybe Laurie, do you remember anything related to that? Because we went to some of the user interviews.
In theory, if you release with the latest stack and they are using the latest stack, then they should be already covered, right?
Yeah, if users are using the latest tag, there should be an update like that. Some of our smaller customers operate that way and just automatically use whatever is the latest tag. A lot of the bigger scale organizations that we've talked to tend to work a little bit more manually, where they've gone through the process and releasing a new one, and then they want the commit SHA. They've used the commit SHA for whatever generated this new release as the tag name, and so they have to go get that. Okay. There's a fear that the latest one may be broken, and so they kind of want that manual step sometimes. That's more of what I'm addressing. The smaller organizations tend to follow the pattern you mentioned. It's the latest tag, we're always going to use latest, we don't have to think about it. Right. Or Tim, do you want to just vocalize that?
Or they call it specifically release, like GitLab does this, we'll call it release 12_8, and that'll be the image that's tied to that specific release. Or they may call it master or something like that. So it seems like a lot of time, if there is an image that is tied to a release, it could be something that we could maybe add to the release evidence page. That might be an easy win. I'm not sure the same works. The same is true for packages though, because packages tend to be more seen as code and not tied to a given release. They're kind of ongoing, always under development. But at least for images, it does seem like people want to get back to that release time environment. Do you think there would be any value into having this kind of information in the pipelines page?
So this question was recently brought up. I read it somewhere this week, I believe, and this was brought up by you, Ian, I believe. You asked, is package information searchable in like a pipeline view? And then the example you showed was of a pipeline list page. And I think my answer upon that was, I think it makes sense to show it in the pipeline detail view for sure. On the other hand, in the pipeline list view, we should, make it a, we should really consider it if it's in there. Like I would say a pipeline list view is more for managing pipelines instead of, like finding out or downloading multiple versions of packages across pipelines. But I could be wrong. But that was my answer back then, if I recall correctly.
For sure. I think your first point is really valid. The detail page is a place where the robust package data could be. I do think there's an opportunity when users are looking at the different pipelines and what they produce and what's going on. Pipelines that end up producing a new image or a new image with a certain type, like name or tag or something like that, would help determine what's happening in the pipeline in that kind of preview of all the different pipelines. Does that make any sense? Or Tim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Can you explain that again? I think I missed it a bit.
For sure. So when I've talked to some users, depending on the outcome of a pipeline, if a pipeline will produce an important image or will produce a new version of a package, I think it's useful to show that in the pipeline list view, because that's the pipelines have different goals if it does do this or if it doesn't. We've kind of heard that from users. Is there any other things like that or artifacts that get created that are shown in the pipeline view?
You can, for example, I think if you are writing things to the cache, you could inspect that. You can go and see that the cache has been updated. I think that's on the details page, not the list view though, but that's maybe that's a location where we could consider adding some additional information.
Yeah, I think it's in the job details page, not discoverable on the pipeline page.
Just to clarify what you're saying, Ian, is that in the pipeline page you should be able to see what's the outcome, like the artifact, the final artifact.
I may not go that far. It would be cool because I think packages are the most important thing because that's my job. But ignoring that fact, I think whether a pipeline produces an image, it could just be a small piece of metadata. On the view can change their perspective of what that pipeline does.
But what that will be exactly? What metadata will you show?
I was initially thinking, and I'm way out of my depth here, so everyone can feel free to tell me this is not a good idea, but in the pipeline view, having some sort of, even if it's an icon of a container that just highlights like what happened in that pipeline. I don't know if that's an option we're showing now, but I've just heard from users that does differentiate how they view a pipeline. If it creates the image, it's a different type of pipeline for them. And that's why I'm curious if that would help users manage their pipelines, as if they could see that at a glance. Is that a little clear?
Yeah, I actually like that idea a lot because I don't know if it's useful for people who have been working with those pipelines for a while, might not be. But if you're new to the whole CI stack of your company, it helps with onboarding, I guess, at the very least.
We will
Because
have
now
to
you know that.
consider though. Sorry, go ahead. Go on.
No, because now you will know that like this particular pipeline is producing an image, and then it will be easier to just kind of like start tracing back what's the reason for that, you know.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly the use case that we were working with, is that when there is an issue with a tag or a package, one of the first things they do is go back to the pipeline that created it to work their way backwards.
We'll have to consider though the scenario of a monorepo where every pipeline always will generate all kind of assets and packages and releases and so on. But yeah, I still think it's worthwhile to explore.
For sure. Great. If we ignore pipelines in their detail and list view, is there anywhere else that we think could be useful to add some package data so that, again, users never have to visit our UI?
What
Hey,
about-
so
Oh, go ahead, Tao.
sorry, when we say the pipeline details page, are we talking only on the pipeline tabs? Because there's a job tabs in a, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing. It might be helpful to pinpoint which job did the build of that package. And what I'm talking about real quick is this example here, where I know when you normally go to a pipeline details view, you land on that tab, but there is that jobs tab. I don't know.
That's a really good call out. I bet that would be incredibly useful for users to be able to see exactly what job tried to create that tag. That's wonderful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I would say often with CI features, it kind of propagates through to both the pipeline and eventually the job that, you know, does the job.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. I think we have fleshed that out a little bit. We've got some ideas. I'll work with Tim and we'll turn these into issues and start taking action on them because they're packaged. I'm really excited. If we want to move on to CI's topics, this is a brand new topic.
All right. So I already shared a bit of this, but I'm kind of interested in, you know, where we can do a better job of informing the user about the status of their pipeline in a timely way. So for example, what people are currently doing is, you know, they generate a pipeline because they push their changes and then they move towards the pipeline list view and wait for their pipeline to finish and then, you know, or fail, and then they're going to go troubleshoot. Additionally, there are some other insights here shared where users have given the opinion that they would like for builds to be able to build locally, where they, you know, are in control of every aspect of it. And I would say in the end, the idea is to have the builds be faster, be run faster, of course. The bigger pipeline is, the more impossible that is, but you know, they want to give that feedback loop. They want to keep it as short as possible, basically. And lastly, let me see, people are looking for both pipeline status and progression. So what happens when a user is less certain about their pipeline configuration or the code they've pushed up? They're more interested in what's really going on inside of the job and how the code is progressing, instead of just like, hey, did my pipeline do well or not? Which it will go towards, like the user is more interested in, you know, did it do good or bad, if they're more certain about their code or their pipeline configuration rather, sorry. So with that, yeah, I'm gonna give it away to Mike. Perhaps you know of a specific point you think of where you say like, hey, this might be interesting to surface, you know, status or outcome of a pipeline in a better way or in a more timely way. Just pointing you out here. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'm gonna go to an area that like seems to be overlooked a lot, but I feel like it's my baby. So on the spot, I'm gonna bring it up. Pages, right? Like Pages rises and fall on whether or not that pipeline succeeded and that whole process, right? Like our pages implementation essentially is just a CI tool that runs, right? But there is a big gap between people's understanding generally of, coming from other things like a WordPress or something like that. People want to interact, say, build this thing, do that thing. But really this is the pipeline that they're not expecting going over there. So on the pages settings, maybe a status of where pipelines have succeeded and failed, and then that ultimately results in a pages delivery, right? It's almost like a release of a page. So I would think somewhere in the pages settings might be an interesting place to surface that kind of information.
Would you say this always is tied to a specific user? So I'm kind of pointing at, like a personal dashboard for your personal pipelines or something like that?
I don't know. I mean, relating it back to the pages, that's one of the problems with pages is there isn't really like a dashboard kind of thing like that. We've been trending a little bit towards maybe we might need that, right? Really, pages exist as just a domain settings thing that's kind of tucked away deep in the settings thing. But if we had some sort of dashboard like that, that would honestly be the thing that would, in my opinion, drive us to need a dashboard type of thing, which is what users are really looking for. We found in our user testing, 9 times out of 10 when people are going to the pages settings page, what they want is a dashboard. What they're getting is a domain settings configuration. So this would be a great, stepping stone to that solution of what people really want out of pages.
What kind of information are they expecting in that dashboard?
It's really that. It's just is it built, right? Like if you go through the process, right, to create a pages deployment, really, it's 1 or 2 lines of code in your YAML file, right? Like it's a page job that says build your thing. And usually folks that are doing that don't really have the idea of, full on CI, CD, and that whole process. So if they just had this simple little like status of did it get built? I added my line of code, I read the documentation, I figured it out, it ran. But right now, the only way to do that is checking in on the pipelines. And if you're not a CI/CD user, you have no idea what a pipeline is or job, and you really don't want to acquire that information. You just want to know, like, was it successfully deployed?
Is this behavior that you're describing happening because people commit to master directly? Because I would expect that on a merge request, you can see the pipeline widget, and you'll have that knowledge of whether the pipeline is gonna fail or not, So essentially giving you insight into whether it's gonna build or not. But what it seems that you're saying is that maybe they're just like committing to master, and then maybe it fails, so it never makes it to master because it never really actually happened, and then because the merge request happened in the context of trying to merge into master directly, and then like you can find that information in the pipeline page, but they never go and check that. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a good point there. That, yeah, a lot of times with a pages project in particular, but maybe we can expand this outside of the pages realm a little bit there of, yeah, it's generally your less advanced users that want to, just understand this status thing. And they don't really understand the whole build process and all that. And then maybe their project isn't even at the point where they want to get into that whole world, right? It's like auto DevOps +1, right? Because pages isn't part of the auto DevOps, but I think maybe that's the user we're targeting, and maybe we can expand this conversation out of like, where should we surface the status type information would probably be a good persona to look at is the less complex. I have a very simple project. I'm not worried about branches. I'm not worried about that. Like the simplest places for our less advanced users is probably the exact kind of person that would want that status information displayed up a level outside of the you know, context of the pipeline view.
Is there is there any merit to pairing that information with anything else? This comment is coming from world of, let's build all the dashboards. Oh, and now we have different tabs for all the dashboards. And oh, wait, now we need one meta dashboard for all the dashboards. So I just caution against creating a dashboard for each particular thing. Not that that's what we're doing here, but just keep that in mind. Like, can we pull this information into something else to show it and provide additional context instead of doing something standalone?
Yeah, and maybe a
I do
great
like the
place
idea
for
of,
that. Maybe a great place for that is, you know, we do have this, every project has a project details page, right? And at the top of that, or maybe somewhere in that, like maybe this is a great place to service it, because that would alleviate the need for a pages dashboard. It would be, you know, here is the status of things that have happened, and maybe, you know, of the pipeline, but also maybe that's another place we surface some package information too as well, right? Like maybe there is just a here has what, because right now the details page of a project is largely like just a files listing, right? It is exactly, if you click on the tab of files at the project detail page, there's very little variance between those two.
But it does show the latest commit though, and if it's being run through a pipeline, it does show that at the top of the file list. If a pipeline is currently being run, then you will see a little widget there that it says merge branch to blah 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 into master, and then it's gonna have the spinning icon of the pipeline. So I mean, there's precedent that there's already a pipeline feedback there. Perhaps the problem is that people don't get it. They just see that and they're like,
yeah,
well, whatever.
I suspect the same problem as you assumed with them pushing to master directly, and pages being in our navigation. The only like pages reference in our navigation is the settings. So people are navigating there. Like, this is purely assumption, but people are navigating there and then wanting to see information about pages. They do not make a correlation between pipelines and pages yet. So I'd say there's some opportunity there for us to do better in environments potentially, or on the project setting or project details page, as you suggested.
I have a personal experience with GitLab that it's totally probably biased, and so I'm just gonna say it. So I have a small project, and I use GitLab. I have a small side project where I use GitLab CI/CD for doing my things. And usually, what I do is that I write the code and then I commit from my Visual Studio, and then I want to see what's happening with the pipeline, right? Like, I want to babysit the pipeline just to make sure that it's gonna succeed, right? And I think that process from going to gitlab.com and then finding that pipeline, there's a lot of drilling there. And I think for me, it will be just enough if I land into the project view. So like in the project detail view, where you have the list, and I could get maybe a little bit more feedback on what's going on pipeline wise there. I think that could solve for many of these problems perhaps, but I don't know. That's my personal experience, is that still feels that you have to drill down a lot to just find, hey, it's the pipeline running, you know?
Yeah, I love hearing this because it's very aligned to my agenda item with the environments, pipelines, and the deployments that if you have, for example, multi projects, right? With GitLab, it's very difficult to get a notion of how your projects are doing. Like, have this. I mean, we don't have to go with a dashboard. Our proposal is to go with a dashboard. But we're missing like this linking point to see and manage like the health status of your pipelines. And we do have the environments dashboard. Is that how we call it now? Yeah. But there's also a point like, how are people even using this thing, and how can we look at this again? Because was it you, Dimitri? You worked at some point, right, on the environments dashboard as well. I worked on it. You worked on it as well.
I worked on it in the beginning, yes.
Yeah. And then is this a place where we can I don't know, bring more attention about what's going on in your pipeline, let me just add here the link.
Can someone add a link to an example or share their screen? I'm not quite sure what we're talking about.
To the agenda.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I think you need to add the projects yourself because I see my own projects, but this exists.
I totally agree with this. Every time I see a pipeline running, I get the original notification that it started, and then to navigate to it, I have to go find my project and find my merge request, and then I click my pipeline. So it feels like it takes me 3 or 4 steps each time.
Yeah.
If I could just see it at the top of my project, that there's a pipeline running, a little indicator, and I could drill in from there, that would be really useful.
That will be super useful for me. I don't know for users, but for me, it will be super useful to just go to gitlab.com, projects list, and then see if the project is running a pipeline. That for me, it's already kind of like a huge improvement, you know.
I'm gonna share my
Yeah,
screen
like an
real
in
quick.
progress pipeline drawer. Like that would be nice.
Yeah.
I can find my window. There we go. So I think we have this view. If this was sorted instead of by whatever it's sorted by, but by last updated, it would show you what you contributed to and the pipeline status. If it's, I just want to know the status of my contributed projects pipelines, this is that view, I think.
That's the same view that list uses.
Oh, this is only for masters, not for any. Okay, cool. Thanks.
But still, that will be helpful. I mean, I don't know. Good to know that that's there.
Yeah, you might be working in multiple branches on the same project, right? So we'll need some more granularity there.
And one interesting thing that I stumbled across the other day is that digging through settings, you know, there is a place in our settings where you can grab a snippet and put it, we have it in Markdown or a snippet or whatever, that essentially allows you to, wherever you have Markdown, you are able to show this information, right? We can do this. This exists. We don't even write code to make this happen. Maybe it's something to do with that, right? Where we just evangelize that that is a thing that can happen, and wherever you have Markdown, you can include this, whether it's an issue, a merger, whatever you want to do. Any place that there's Markdown, i.e. everywhere, you can do this. So that one might be an interesting one, just evangelizing that.
I believe that too is limited to master, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, so maybe we can expand on that to make that more configurable. But that one to me is an interesting one, because what I was saying about adding it to the, the project details page, it's entirely possible. Put it at the top of your README file, and there you go. It exists.
Cool. I'm going to jump in here.
Oh, go ahead.
As soon as Dimitri's done.
I'm done. I won't say anything.
I was just going to say, in terms of time management, we have about 15 minutes left, so I thought it would be good to try to get this third topic in there. And then we have a little bit of a wrap up. So unless there's any final thoughts, let's move to progressive delivery.
All right, I was hoping that would happen, because what I just said dovetails perfectly into my point, right? So we have a lot of things that we can do. A great example would be you can have your pipeline status in Markdown and display that wherever you want. The problem is people don't know about a lot of this stuff, right? So we suffer from this a lot in progressive delivery. Feature flags, Spinnaker, or review apps. What we found a lot of times is we're getting low adoption of these things, and user interviews and things like that are showing that it's not, while we do have room for improvement in our implementation of these features, a lot of the reason why we have low adoption of these things is people just aren't aware that they exist, right? So review apps is a great example. Everybody that uses it loves it. One of their favorite features. Why are people not using it? Because they don't know what it is and they don't know how to set it up. So the few that I linked here of usability things is It's a common theme, but basically people nowadays expect some level of setup for things, right? Just knowing that they exist and having to manually configure them is kind of becoming not the expectation anymore. The expectation in modern SaaS applications now is that I will be able to set this up through some things. And the other topic is our documentation is got some room for improvement, we'll just say. A lot of times when the option is to use X feature means I am now forced to go to the documentation, read and understand, that has presented to be a barrier of entry to these kind of features. So I think this is a good topic for everybody, because I'm sure in progressive delivery, we have a few features that are suffering from this, but I'm sure everybody's feature is suffering adoption for this. So I see Ian nodding his head, so I'm kicking it to you. What do you think?
Oh, I'm nodding my head because users have said our documentation could improve, and I was resonating with that. We just are in the middle of a big process around that. My question is, you had mentioned auto DevOps, and kind of users are expecting the ability to just kind of turn it on. Do you think that's an area we should explore? Some of these more advanced features that our users really love is just trying to plug their way into the auto DevOps and kind of push ourselves to the idea of like, we want you to do as little setup as you need to do as the default. And that's how we allow users to explore these features.
Yeah, and there's a related feature or issue to this. The difficulty that I've found personally, and also has come in user interviews a little bit, is it's auto DevOps +1, right? So auto DevOps is great if it's configured and it does everything that you need. You hit the button, magic happens, your world is wonderful. But the moment that you want to one step past that, essentially requires you to burn down your auto DevOps and then recreate that itself, because our templating system, if you're using the web ID to edit this thing, or even if you're doing it yourself, your option is either like auto DevOps is on, and then there's this YAML file that exists out there in magic land that you don't really have access to. So you now have to create your own, which you could use the template for auto DevOps, but you're faced with, going back to pages again. If you want to use the pages example, it doesn't include all the auto DevOps stuff. So there's no composability to that YAML file, and it makes that auto DevOps +1 very difficult to go to.
I looked for the insight that is relatable to this in the research that I did. There was one user that said that they initially used GitLab CI, then they switched over to GitHub because they had some configurability problems. I couldn't really find out exactly what it was, but in the end, where it came down to that, GitHub Actions was easier to use for them. And then we jumped a little bit into details on that, and what we came out to is that the GitHub Actions has some kind of feature of, like, you could say it like sub-templates. So you can add snippets into your CI configuration, which are managed, like community managed. And then that snippet has variables which are configurable by the current user. So you could say, hey, I want to, I need to make connection with my SSH server. I'll use this SSH snippet. I'll put it into my GitLab CI YAML. And bam, I just need to configure this, this username and a user password. And bam, I got a connection with SSH. No pain. And if something is, something needs to be updated, then the maintainer of the snippet does that and automatically stays working, like the library kind of thing, right? Yeah, it makes sense to have something like that, more fidelity towards your template snippet feature in GitLab.
So composable auto DevOps lets you pull out distinct jobs within the entire auto DevOps template, the CI template to use. I had this discussion with Jason a while back when I was working on templates group, which is now not getting funded, but about whether or not we wanted to model something after what GitHub has for Actions, which uses the model of building blocks for pieces of you can pick and choose to put into your CI pipeline. And I think the general approach and how Sid looks at it is we don't want to get into the business of offering snippets. I mean, we offer that in a way, in the way composable auto DevOps has distinct jobs that you can call and not adopt the entire pipeline. But Dimitri did mention something that is something we want to pursue is there is a story that exists now to enhance the way our templates work, to allow when you create a template and it's being used to dynamically allow the user to add variables at that time. We don't support that now. I could see pursuing that, but not necessarily modeling what we're going to build after the GitHub Actions. I'm trying to find that the related story about the variables, and I'll add it to the agenda.
Awesome, thank you. I do. I don't know if anybody else has any other topics on that YAML file being a potential place for this, but I think that's one of potentially hundreds of ways we can evangelize or surface that features exist. You know, other ideas could be, you know, kind of if you have feature X, feature Y is presented to you as an option, you know, kind of a toast or a modal or that kind of idea. Has anybody had any experience or thoughts around places in the UI where we can encourage, if you have met some criteria, that maybe you might want to go this next step to know that this other feature does exist?
It's funny that you mentioned that. Yesterday was Packages ThinkBIG, and one of the conversations we were having is how to improve usage of the dependency proxy. And this might be one of those places where the real value of the dependency proxy is it can speed up your pipelines. So that might be a place where we can nudge a user, like you had mentioned, something subtle like a toast or maybe one of those little marketing banners that says, hey, you could speed up your pipelines if you enable the dependency proxy, it would go here. And make them more reliable, 100% correct him. And so that could be an area that we could try that out. So that's just one that we've just talked about yesterday.
And I know that the growth team is working on a couple of different like in-app messaging capabilities and push messages to customers, or even like A/B testing. So if there's certain triggers that we can add to the in-app messaging. So for example, if they are on the environment variable page saying like, hey, did you know you can, you know, mask this variable or do whatever you want to do with it? Like those are kinds of activities that I've seen done in other applications really elegantly, but they have used things like Pendo or Amplitude to force a user journey if the workflow is predictable. I think that's one challenge with GitLab, that we don't necessarily have a journey that we want to shove a user toward, but there are certain actions that we do want to encourage the adoption of. So I think that if we look at it at a per stage level or per group level, we might be able to find some events to trigger. But I do feel like unless we map out customer journeys that we want to encourage, that's kind of like the precursor to then effectively encourage discoverability and understand what are like the high priority flows that we would want to force or adopt or mandate, whatever word we want to use there.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, that the growth team is being very cautious in the way, and you know, we have a dedicated team to doing that thing so it does not become the Wild West, because this quickly spirals out of control if every designer, every PM says my thing's important and we all push toast. Then GitLab quickly becomes an unusable platform where the biggest requested feature would be, how do I turn this off? I never want to see this again, right? So I think it'll be very important for us as an entire CI/CD team to prioritize the most important features, and you know, once the growth team gets to the point where they are reaching out and looking to expand that, which I assume will happen. We have a strategy in place of, you know, a holistic strategy, right? We can't all just say our thing is important and let's surface everything. We need to have a prioritized list, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's what I mean by flows, like user behaviors or goals they're trying to accomplish with GitLab, because when we start looking at feature granularity, we miss things like driving active users over a consistent period of time. So like if we're not aligned to accomplish a certain action as a group, then we're going to be very myopic and focused on executing one behavior. And then again, like that could be a really jarring or disappointing experiences for a persona that's typically using a CLI and is only popping in to check out the UI in one feature, or is typically always in the front end and is trying to do their day-to-day job. So it might be interesting if we take the time in our next ThinkBIG to like look at the personas that CI/CD wants to tackle as a whole and kind of map out the different flows that we would want to work toward as a group. And then that we can then surface back to the growth team as like a candidate for triggered actions.
I was gonna say, oh no, I was just gonna point out, like, kind of like going back to Mike's question of like another area could be those buttons that are above the file list in the project detail. I don't know if we have telemetry on these, but like when you have a fresh new project, that's one area where auto DevOps is suggested. So I don't know if like there's a lot of activations of auto DevOps and adoption through that button, but I always found that interesting, and I don't think we'll leverage that. Like, and what I like about that just is that it's very ad hoc. So kind of like from what Jackie was saying, that we don't want to impose a user journey. We want to be more ad hoc in that sense. If you add a button there saying enable feature flags, you know, that's a very ad hoc way of telling them, hey, there's a new feature that you could check, you know. So just an idea.
Perfect. I'm going to jump into this little lull. That was great, everyone. I think that was really exciting. It is time for the meeting to end. I am really excited. Thank you, everyone, again. I'm going to say this 1,000 times for contributing and talking through all of this. It was really nice to get perspectives outside of my own stage in terms of what people are thinking about and how we're working. Unfortunately, we don't have time for release management. I am very sad about this, but assuming we want to move forward, that can be our first topic for our next ThinkBIG. Wrap up and next steps. Everyone, please go through the agenda, and if there's anything that could be turned into an issue and started to plan and think about, please make sure to create those issues and add the ThinkBIG label. It was created. That's our way to track how much these meetings impact our work. It's a metric that we can use. So I really appreciate it. And the other thing I'm going to ask, which is super annoying, is if everyone could please visit the retro issue. There's a link in the agenda. And just leave your feedback. We've asked a couple of questions, which is basically, was this beneficial? Is there something we can improve, and would you do it again? If you could fill that out and let us know, that would be great. Sooner is always better. I think that's a universal truth of a lot of things. But this will help us decide if everyone's interested, if we thought this was productive. We can schedule out the next one and start turning this into a more formal session. I imagine my GitLab-y brain saying that there's an MR to the handbook coming if we want to move forward. So if you could provide that feedback, that would be really great. Does anyone have any last few things to add before we end the recording and wrap up?
I have a question. What cadence do we want to go for this?
That's a great question. Package has found a sweet spot in the monthly cadence. So once a milestone, we have lots to talk about, but we're still respecting everyone's sync time as being very precious. I don't know what everyone else's thoughts are, but that's just the perspective that I have. All right.
I like once per month. Sorry, just voting for that.
Why is this replacing the monthly one you have, Tim?
No, I think we would do them separately still, because I think that these two meetings have different purposes, it feels like.
Agree.
Yeah, I
But
think, I mean, we didn't get to Hayana's point. So I think it's safe to say that we cannot discuss all stage groups every time. So there will be some overlap across multiple months if we do it monthly for some stage groups, which is all right, I think.
Yeah, one of the notes I just left in the retrospective was how do we decide to prioritize or focus in this group? Because that way we can try to touch everybody rather than overlapping. But yeah.
That's great feedback. I'm not gonna lie, I think a couple of the designers were like, we're gonna pick topics, and that's how we started. But we can talk about a structure that we can add so that everyone gets a chance to talk, because we don't quite have enough time.
thanks, Ian, for driving this.
You're welcome.
Thanks all.